Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to Empty Cloud Monastery. So this evening I'll be giving a Dhamma talk on the 6 elements meditation. So giving some explanation about this particular meditation method. So we can start by paying homage to the Buddha, and then I'll give a Dhamma talk. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassami. So this evening I'll be explaining the meditation on the 6 elements. So this is a practice which we find mentioned in a number of suttas, and actually one of the more clear explanations is given in the Maharahulabhada Sutta, so a quite detailed explanation of the 6 elements. And of course it's found in many other places. And there's also a number of suttas where the Buddha refers to just the first 4 elements. For example, in the Satipatthana Sutta, in the mindfulness of body section, the Buddha mentions only the first 4 elements. But for my own practice, I find it most useful to take the full set of 6 elements. So these are 6 ways of relating to our experience. So the Buddha gave many different frameworks which we can use in order to divide our experience up into manageable pieces and to understand and analyze each of those individual pieces. So for example, the 5 khandhas, the 6 sense domains, the 6 elements, and a few others which we find throughout the suttas. And the 6 elements is particularly interesting as a meditation practice because it gives a fair amount of variety. It gives a way of engaging with investigation of body and mind, which can be quite intriguing, quite interesting. So briefly speaking, the 6 elements are, the first one is Patavi in Pali, which means earth. The second one is Apo, which means water or moisture, to be more precise. The third one is Tejo, which means heat. It's commonly translated as fire, but Tejo more precisely means heat. So there are other words that mean fire, such as Agi. Agi means fire. But the word Tejo specifically means heat. The fourth element is Vaya, which is commonly translated as air, but again, that's not quite correct. The word Vaya more precisely means wind. And actually, the literal meaning of Vaya is simply movement. So this also becomes relevant when practicing the elements meditation. The 5th element is called Akasa, which we usually translate as space, which is actually quite a reasonable translation. And the 6th one is Vijnana, consciousness. So again, this is a complete picture of our experience. So every aspect of our experience can be fitted into one of these 6 domains. So the first element, so the Patavi Dhatu, the earth element, refers to that aspect of our experience which resembles the earth, which is most similar to earth. So what are the characteristics of earth? So you think of stones, or you think of soil, and what's its main characteristic? So stone in particular, this is quite clear. Its main characteristics are hard, heavy, dense, resistant. So these are the characteristics of earth element. So then similarly with examining one's own experience, one is looking at the aspects of one's own experience, which are hard, heavy, dense, solid, which have this quality of resistance and weightiness. So in the suttas, for example, the Buddha talks about paying attention to the aspects of the body, the parts of the body which are most earth-like. For example, the bones. Bones are quite similar to stone, which includes your teeth. Your teeth are similarly very obviously earth-like. Fingernails, skin, muscles. Actually, much of the body has a very distinct heaviness, density, weightiness, semi-solid characteristic. So by focusing on that experience of heaviness, that experience of solidity, of density, first off, this can be a way of cultivating samadhi, a way of bringing the mind into a steadiness and a stillness. And the earth element is particularly good for developing samadhi of all of the 6 elements. The earth element is particularly good because the earth element has as one of its primary qualities this sense of stillness and immobility. It has this sense of being immovable, unmoving and so not capable of moving, but also not something that can be moved, not something that can be disturbed. So in the same way with focusing on the earth-like aspects of our experience, then the mind can become increasingly immovable, increasingly still and steady, like the earth. Another important aspect of reflecting on the earth element, so when reflecting on the solid matter that makes up the body, one can also consider where the solid matter comes from. So when eating solid food, for example, it comes into the body and is digested and used to build up the muscles and bones and skin and nails and hair and all the other solid parts of the body. And then eventually that gets converted into waste and removed from the body. So the hair falls out, the skin flakes off, and periodically we defecate, clip our toenails and so on. So we're constantly bringing in earth element from outside, so in the form of food, and periodically expelling earth element from the body in the form of skin particles, hair, nails, and feces. And all of that then decomposes and mixes with the external earth element, so returns to the soil and eventually becomes food again. So you can see this cycle of the earth element of nature progressing through times when it's inside the body and outside the body. You can see it shifting and changing particular form, but it all has the basic characteristic of earth element. So this is another way of using this meditation. So once one has a clear sense of earth element, one can recognize that the earth element itself is simply an aspect of nature. So it's not something which is always and eternally me, but rather it's an aspect of nature which sometimes comes within the zone that we call my body, and is in that zone for a period of time and then passes out of that zone. So it's never who we are, it's always just nature, but every now and then it passes into this arbitrarily designated zone that we call my body. So reflecting in this way, one can start to see that the earth element is not me, it's not mine. It's just something which shifts and changes according to the laws of cause and effect. And that the area which we call my body is arbitrary and in fact simply made up of natural elements, natural components, which are not me and not mine. So the second element is the apo dhatu, so the element of moisture, of water. So this is something which can be felt in the sense of moisture, of liquidity, the sense of wetness. And this can be felt all throughout the body. So it's particularly noticeable in the mouth, as you can feel the liquid inside the mouth. You can often feel it in your nose as well, to one degree or another. You can feel it in your eyes. You can feel it in your stomach. You can feel the stomach fluids. You can feel sweat on the surface of your skin. You can feel the oils on your skin as well. But actually, as you pay attention to the body, you realize that you can also feel the blood flowing through your veins. And this can get quite interesting when you pay close attention. You can feel the liquid circulating through the whole body. And even one's flesh, so we normally relate to flesh as being something relatively solid. But when you pay attention to it in terms of the elements, you'll recognize that it's actually saturated with water. It's saturated with moisture. And if we get into talking about science, the body is mostly water. It's mostly liquid. Even though we relate to it as a solid object, it's actually mostly liquid. So the whole body is saturated with moisture. So then meditating on the water element is focusing one's attention on clearly feeling that aspect of our experience, that aspect of wetness, of moisture, of fluidity. And again, feeling that all throughout the domain that we call my body. And again, this can be used as a samadhi practice. So it's a little bit more difficult than with the earth element, because the water element is a bit more fluid by its nature. But it can still be a basis for soothing and settling the mind. So bringing the mind into a clear awareness of the body experience. And also, again, it's a way of perceiving the impersonal nature of the body. So what is this water element? Well, we bring it in from the outside. And it gets integrated into the body, circulated through the body, and expelled from the body. So it's expelled through the eyes, it's expelled through the urinary tract, it's expelled through our pores when we sweat. It's expelled through the nose and the mouth and the ears. So the body is constantly bringing in liquid and also constantly leaking liquid, expelling liquid. So similarly to the earth element, you can recognize that the water element, these aspects of experience characterized by liquidity, by moisture, they're constantly moving into the body and leaving the body, moving into the body and leaving the body. So it's just water element shifting and moving. So it's just this particular aspect of nature, changing location. But it's not me when it's outside the body, and it's still not me when it's inside the body. It's just the water element of nature. It's just that aspect of the natural world which is characterized by feeling moisture. So here again, we can recognize that the water aspect of our experience is not me, not mine. It's just a function of nature, something which shifts and changes based upon cause and effect, but which is ultimately impersonal, ultimately not me, not mine. The third element, the tejo dhatu, again, tejo means heat, commonly translated as the fire element, but more precisely, it's the heat element. So this is the experience of temperature. So this one also can be quite good for samadhi. So focusing on your experience of the body, focusing on the feeling of warmth within the body. And again, this is something that you can feel saturating the entire body. It tends to be particularly strong in the torso region, but actually the whole body is warm. The whole body is permeated with the heat element, the tejo dhatu. And it has a feeling of stillness, similar to the earth element. So the heat element is quite good for samadhi practice, as the earth element is, because the heat element is not circulating in the way that the water element circulates. So the heat element has a sense of stillness. It's a little bit more ethereal than the earth element. And actually, this can be seen in the sequence of the elements as they proceed from the more coarse to the more ethereal. So it's this progression. So the heat element is more ethereal, but it's still a distinctly tangible physical sensation, physical experience, which does have this quality of stillness. So focusing on the heat element of the body, again, you can feel the whole body as this radiant mass of temperature, this radiant mass of warmth. And also recognizing that there is no clear edge to the body. So if you look at a thermal image of a human body, you actually can't see where the skin is. If you look at a thermal image of the body, it's, of course, it's the brightest at the center of the body, and then it just radiates out from there into this kind of amorphous blob, which extends, actually theoretically, it extends infinitely in all directions. It just rapidly gets fainter as you move away from the body. But you can clearly see that the heat element of the body is inseparable from the heat element outside the body. So it all blurs together into one general field of heat, one field of heat energy. There's no clear inside and outside. And similarly to the other elements, you can also recognize that the body is constantly absorbing heat. So especially if you're outside on a hot summer day, or if it's winter, maybe you're curled up by the radiator, or with your heating pad or hot water bottle in bed, and you're absorbing heat from the outside. Or maybe you're drinking a hot cup of tea, you're absorbing heat from the hot liquid. And also the body is constantly giving off heat. Again, this is especially noticeable on a cold day. You can feel the body exuding heat into the surrounding environment. So here again, we recognize that the heat element is just an aspect of the natural world that goes through its motions, its changes, and passes through the domain that we call our body. But the heat element itself is not ours. It doesn't belong to us. It's just an aspect of nature. And similarly, the fourth element, so the fourth element is the Vayo Dhatu. So as I mentioned earlier, Vayo means wind or movement. It's commonly translated as air element, but again, that's not quite accurate. It means wind or movement. And often the easiest way to get in touch with the wind element is through feeling one's breathing. So feeling air flowing into the body, circulating through the body and flowing back out. And what's particularly noticeable there is, in fact, the characteristic of movement. So the movement of air in and out of the body. So this feeling of expansion and contraction as air flows in and out of the body. And the Buddha also talks about feeling air circulating within the body. So feeling it circulating through one's limbs, feeling it circulating not just in one's lungs, but throughout the entire body. So you can actually feel as you breathe in, you can feel the entire body expanding. You can feel that the air reaching every corner of the body. And as you breathe out, you can feel it expelling, squeezing out from every corner of the body. So here again, it's a way of coming into clear awareness of our physical experience, a clear awareness of the body. And the focus on the wind element is not particularly supportive for samadhi practice. As with mindfulness of breathing, it's particularly good for cultivating anicca sanya, the recognition of impermanence, because its very nature is movement, and movement is change. So paying attention to the air element is particularly supportive for the recognition of impermanence. And again, also it's a way of developing anatta sanya. So recognizing that the air outside the body is just part of nature, so not me, not mine. And the air flows into the zone that we arbitrarily call me, circulates within the zone that we arbitrarily call me, and exits the zone that we arbitrarily call me. But at no point in there does the air magically become me. It's always just part of nature. It's always just part of the outside world. So this distinction between inside and outside, once again, is completely arbitrary and unnecessary. From the point of view of nature, this line that we draw is completely meaningless. It makes about as much sense as the line that we draw between, say, New Jersey and what's the state next to New Jersey? Help me out here. Pennsylvania? Okay. New York, yeah, that's true. We have a border with New York, true. So we draw this arbitrary line between New Jersey and New York, but actually if you go to the place in where that line supposedly exists, you won't see anything. And the animals don't seem to care. They don't care that they're crossing from New Jersey into New York, or New York into New Jersey. The wind certainly doesn't care. The wind blows equally right across political boundaries. Heat transfers pretty well, also doesn't seem particularly bothered. So it's actually the same. We draw this arbitrary political boundary of like, on this side of the line, it's me. On that side of the line, it's not me. It's the outside world. But actually, there is no distinction. From the point of view of nature, there's just earth element, water element, heat element, wind element. Like there's no border to be found. And the elements travel freely across this imaginary line. Of course, the Buddha carries on with this. And actually, when I first encountered the teaching on the elements, I was always hearing about the 4 elements, and I was actually always completely disinterested. I was like, 4 elements, is that it? It always felt incomplete. But then when I encountered the teaching on the 6 elements, this was much more interesting. And the reason why it was much more interesting is because it was complete. So the 5th element is space, and the akasa dhatu, the space element. So the way I usually approach this one is to start by paying attention to the body and pay attention to the space occupied by the body. So there's a body-shaped region of empty space right here. And normally we're so fixated on the stuff that's filling that space that we don't pay any attention to the space itself. So pay attention to the space occupied by the body. So what's the characteristics of the space element? So the space element has the characteristic of allowing anything to pass through it. Allowing anything to appear within it, to move within it, to pass through it, unobstructed. So the space element has this quality of openness, of non-obstruction, of permissiveness. So it lets things move through it. It lets things appear and traverse within it. So the element of non-obstruction and spaciousness, of openness. And of course, the space element that is within the domain that we call the body, and the space element outside the domain that we call the body, it's actually just exactly the same space element. So it's just one indivisible field of space. So again, you can draw arbitrary lines in space, but that doesn't actually affect space. Space is still has this quality of being unobstructed, of being embracing. It holds anything within it. It allows anything within it. It allows all physical things to appear and move within space. So in this way also, again, the space element, it can be used as a samadhi practice, but it's much more relevant as a vipassana practice, as a practice of recognizing anatta sanya, of cultivating this direct recognition that all the elements of our experience are ultimately impersonal, just an aspect of the natural world. So no inside, no outside. Not me, not mine, just a part of the natural world. And the sixth element is the consciousness element, vijnana dhatu. And this again is what makes it complete. So the first five elements are all physical. And the sixth one is the domain of the mind. So the vijnana dhatu is the field of mind awareness, the field of mental awareness. So it's the domain of the mind. So just as the space element is that aspect of the natural world which allows physical objects to appear and move around within it, in the same way the consciousness element is that mental space in which mental objects can appear and move around, similarly unobstructed. So the consciousness element is like the space element, but it's the mental correlate. So where the space element is physical, the consciousness element is mental. But otherwise, the characteristic is the same. It has this characteristic of vastness, of spaciousness, of non-obstruction. And actually, the consciousness element then naturally includes the others, because all of those appear within the consciousness element. So the first four elements all appear within the space element, and the first five all appear within the consciousness element. So in this way, all six elements then fit neatly together to give a complete picture of body-mind, a complete picture of both the physical and the mental. And the consciousness element also can be recognized as being an aspect of nature. So all sentient beings have the experience of consciousness. And the particulars and details, so the particular mental objects might vary from being to being, but the fundamental nature of consciousness is exactly the same. So there's no distinction between the consciousness element as I feel it and the consciousness element as anyone else feels it. So we're all having fundamentally the same experience of consciousness element. So in this way, one can see that there is no distinction, no division between one field of consciousness element and another. It's all just exactly the same aspect of the natural world. So again, this is ultimately a practice of anatta sanya, a practice of recognizing that even what we call the mind cannot be divided apart and called distinctly me, separately me, uniquely me. But again, it's just a aspect of the natural world. So this is a basic overview of the six elements. And so with practicing with these meditation practices, it's really important to practice with them at the level of direct experience. So often when people approach the elements meditation, they approach it as a visualization exercise or as a mental game. But that's really missing the point. So the point of earth element is to feel your body, to feel the earth-like aspects of the body, to feel the water-like aspects of the body, the heat aspects of the body, the wind aspect of the body, the space aspect of the body, and to feel the domain of consciousness in which all of that appears. So it's at the level of direct feeling. It's not at the level of abstraction or conceptualization. Again, there's these two modes of using the elements. So there's the mode of samadhi, for which the earth element is particularly well suited, and the heat element is also pretty functional. And then the other domain is the domain of insight, of vipassana, particularly of anatta sanya, the perception of non-self, for which all six elements are useful. All six elements can be applied to the perception of non-self. So that's a brief overview of this meditation practice. So it's also possible to spend an entire meditation period on just one element, or to progressively move through all six to get a complete experience of all six. It's also possible to spread it out over multiple days. So I've sometimes enjoyed, during longer meditation retreats, like anything of 6 days or longer, to devote one day to each element. I found that can be a very delightful way of developing this meditation practice. It gives you the time to really go deeply into each element. Trying to do all six of them in 20 minutes, it's possible, but it always feels rushed. It always feels like one is racing through each one and not really giving it the full attention it deserves. But like spending a whole day just on water element, you can get an incredibly refined and intimate awareness of the water element within your own experience, and a clear recognition of its function as being a part of nature. Right? And you can get a clear sense of it as being not me and not mine. So I do recommend taking the time to dig deeply into each element, so not rushing through them too quickly. If one is maybe particularly bored and you want something exciting, and it's a way of keeping your mind on the meditation, then it's okay. It's okay to go through all of them in one sitting. But generally speaking, you'll get the best results by spending a bit more time on each element and really letting it settle fully into the mind. So I think that's enough as an overview. So at this time, I can take any questions that you might have. So hello to all the people joining in online. So hello to Sud, Amaranta, Maria, Bhumika, Mary, Jayanta, Yankee, Robin, Si Yong, and Vantor. So welcome to all of you. And if there's any questions, I can take questions. You have a question? Go ahead.
First, thank you for your translations. I feel like those fit much more with the experience of the meditation in terms of the heat rather than fire. It feels like that. And speaking of the heat element, I was wondering your thoughts. I've never used it necessarily as a samadhi practice, but more looking at the changing. It always seems like there's a changing nature of the heat element. And then also your thoughts. I've used only the heat element in walking meditation, seeing kind of the heat change as my foot contacts the ground, or moving faster to see how is that changing the heat. Like, how's that change the heat element in my leg as I move faster or slower, and also different changes in temperature.
Yeah, I think that's all fine. So using the heat element as a way of developing the perception of impermanence. You really can't go wrong with the perception of impermanence. This is the Swiss Army knife of Vipassana meditation. You can use it with any object at any time. It's always relevant. It's interesting that for you, the heat element has a more tangible sense of impermanence, whereas for me, it has a more tangible sense of stability.
That's the earth element for me.
Yeah. Well, the earth element is very stable. But I also find the heat element has this sense of stillness, but not for you. Yeah. So again, everyone is different. So this is why we explore different meditation methods and also explore different ways of applying meditation methods and trying to get a sense as to what works best for us. Yeah.
Do you ever use the heat element looking at pain, for example, like pain sometimes? Or the sensation, that sensation sometimes for me, like there's that warmth to it and kind of watching that movement.
I don't personally use it that way, but I know other people who have had that as a successful way of coming to equanimity towards pain, as focusing on pain as warmth rather than as pain. Instead, focusing on the warmth. And that tends to shift the mind towards it as something soothing and pleasant rather than as something disruptive and agitating. So I don't personally use that approach, but I know other people who have found it successful.
I haven't tried it that much. Think about it.
Yeah. And I see some questions online. So Amaranta says, it is more clear now, especially space. Great. Would you add more about consciousness? So consciousness is, again, it's quite similar to the space element. So if you can understand the space element, if you can feel the space element, then the mind is almost an exact correlate. It has the same characteristics, except that it's mental rather than physical. So the consciousness element has this, it's the mind field. It's the domain of mind, the domain within which mental objects manifest. So I think that's the clearest way, is to start through cultivating direct awareness of the space element. And then from that, you can observe the consciousness element in the same way. And Amaranta continues, more information is like the objects appearing in your mind and you only observe the movement. Rather, try to observe the field in which the objects appear. So it's a bit like if you look at a painting. Normally we pay attention to the picture, but instead pay attention to the canvas. Or if you're in a movie theater, normally we pay attention to the movie, but instead pay attention to the screen. This is how you can get in touch with the consciousness element. And Allison says, if one is a post-menopausal woman, the heat element is very fluid. Again, it's a different experience for everyone. So if you experience it as fluid, then pay attention to impermanence. As Bhante Metiko was saying, you can focus on the aspect of impermanence, of constant change. And Robin has an off-topic question, which is probably better used for monk chat. So Robin, if you'd like to bring your question to the Friday night monk chat, we'll talk about it then. Any other questions? Yeah.
So, silence concentrator meditation, or shikantaza, is my primary practice. And I've noticed the fluid element and the heat element in particular showing up a lot in it. But I wonder if, since I know you have quite a bit of experience as well, if you would have any comments on the merging of shikantaza with the elements.
I've actually found that after practicing with the 6 elements for a little while, so maybe 30 minutes or an hour or a few hours or a few days, that then the mind seems ready to just drop all the elements and go directly into objectless concentration. So I actually find that the 6 elements tends to be an excellent precursor to Animitta Samadhi. So there does seem to be a relationship between these, because what tends to happen is that after one becomes thoroughly established in the 6 elements, then the 6 elements drop away.
That makes sense. I get what you're saying.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Would you say they drop away natural? Like they just, is there any movement or effort for them to drop away? Or do they drop away, the elements drop away naturally and the object lost concentration and kind of comes into being?
Well, I think that with practicing seeing the inseparability of the internal and external element is a practice of dropping artificial boundaries between things. So then at some point, it becomes natural to drop also the boundary between the 6 elements. Because the 6 elements, it's an artificial separation. There's actually no separation between these 6. So actually all of the frameworks that Buddha speaks about are artificial separations. None of it's real. They're a grid that we project onto a formless reality in order to help us understand it more clearly. But the grid itself is artificial. It's not real.
Just that artificial separation, I understand, between that unnatural, like internal, external. As we, for myself, as I meditate on the elements, like that fades away, like that just, there's no, there's not like I have to make it just naturally happens.
Yeah, just make sure the mind is staying alert. Because things naturally dropping away can be a sign that one's perception of impermanence is advancing, or it can be a sign that you're drifting off.
Yes.
So make sure the mind is alert and awake.
That's always interesting. I don't know. Seems so artificial.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Bhante.
And I don't see any other questions online. So maybe that's enough for one evening, and we can end with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And we'll see you next time.